Hello and thanks for your company. Well, tonight, the real worry about the result of Saturday's by-election in Dunkley and the real loser. Here's a hint, it isn't Labor or the Liberals. Also tonight, the Defence Minister says national security officials have the right not to answer the phone at home. You wonder, is this man serious? Plus claims of blackmail as landowners are forced to accept new transmission lines on their farms or else. Plus, the Brittany Higgins saga claims yet another scalp. This is like a curse, isn't it? Destroying all it touches. I should start, though, by saying thanks again to Steve Price for filling in for me while I took a week off to go see what's happening in Israel. And speaking of that madness, why are we inviting the same haters and dangers here? It was appalling. I mean, last week there I was seeing in Israel the horror unleashed by Palestinian extremists, all the deaths, just shocking. But at the same time, I was reading back home that one prominent Palestinian terrorist, Layla Khaled, a poster girl for terrorism, has been invited to be a key speaker at an eco-conference in Perth on global warming, of all things, at a conference hosted by Marxist group Socialist Alliance Green Left. This is just, I mean, it's almost literally insane. Khaled is a woman who helped to hijack two airplanes in 1969 and 1970 and blew one of them up after evacuating the passengers. Her other hijacking was foiled when an air marshal on the plane shot dead her fellow hijacker, whose grenade, thank God, didn't go off. Khaled didn't explode her own. The head of Shin Bet, who was telling me this, said he considered her a coward from that point of view, but thank God, I guess, again. But now the socialists who have invited Khaled to Australia say, well, oh, please, that was a long time ago. She's now a politician. Not really. And besides, you can't make a revolution without violence that you and I might think, well, a bit wrong.
Now, as I said, there's two things to say about that hijacking. One is it was 50, well, three things. One, it was 50 years ago. Two, she did jail time for them. And three, the fact that she did that in a moment in the Palestinian liberation movement cannot lead us to then exclude her and say, well, she's a terrorist and therefore we can't hear from her forever. It's, you know, an oppressed people who are occupied have a right to fight back. And sometimes they're going to do that using techniques and means that we may not always agree with. But that doesn't mean they're not authentic.
That guy is fooling himself or fooling us. I bet both. The only reason Khaled is coming, or at least speaking by video link, depends whether she can get a visa, coming to a conference on climate is precisely because she was a terrorist. That's her shtick. The Green Left promotes her as exactly that, a freedom fighter, emphasis on the word fighter. So what is this? This seems to be the left trying again to make violence sexy, political violence sexy. How dangerous is that? Or at least sexy if it's violence against Jews. And this is so dangerous when we've already had several terrorist attacks here by radical Muslims, all with the same excuse. Oh, we were forced to do this, forced to do the Lindt Cafe siege in 2014, the Parramatta shooting in 2015, the Melbourne stabbing in 2018, and on and on. We're forced by the oppressors to take these extreme measures. It's the same excuse being used now by Muslim leaders for the October 7 attack on Israel by Hamas. Terrorists murdering 1,200 people. Most civilians, including children, raping women, beheading people, taking more than 250 hostages. Oh, that was justified, said the head of the Islamic Council of Victoria just 8 days after that massacre.
Everything that has happened is a legitimate response to occupation and siege. When I've been interviewed, or any Palestinian representatives interviewed, the first question is, do you condemn the actions of Hamas? Shame on them.
We've already imported that hate into our country, and our eco-socialists want to import even more? Why has the Albanese government still not said no to this madness, said no to Layla Khaled? Now to the result of the Dunkley by-election on Saturday, which in many ways turned out to be a complete bore, I have to say. Pretty much a draw between Labor and the Liberals, or maybe the Liberals a little bit ahead. We shall see from the panel, but essentially a bore, except for two big things. First, good news. The Greens got smashed. They lost 40% of their vote from the last election. 40%. And they're the real losers of this by-election. And that's great. And fingers crossed, they got hammered because voters are turned off by the Greens openly attacking Israel and appealing to Jew haters in this country with huge success. They're getting more and more radical. They're looking now not just kooky, but dangerous. And I hope this strategy blows up in their face. Now, back to the boring bit. That's been Labor and the Liberals both claiming this was a good result from them. You might have seen all day people coming on, spin, 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 spin. No, we won, whatever. Labor reckons it's the winner because it did retain this Victorian seat, won the by-election caused by the death of its local member. And the Treasurer today was crowing, well, the win was really essentially because of his promised tax breaks.
I think the Dunkley by-election was a vindication of the leadership that the Prime Minister showed in making sure we could provide a tax cut to every Australian taxpayer, but with a bigger emphasis on Middle Australia.
Meanwhile, the Liberals said the swing to them, which is more than 3.6% and counting so far, probably will go higher, was well above the average swing against the one-term government in a by-election. And when you look at how many other Labor seats would fall to the Liberals at the next election, if that same swing was repeated, not just Dunkley, but 10 more seats would come. So that's not bad. And if the Liberals also then won a couple of the seats back from the Teal Independents, some of them on very small margins too, they could actually pull off a miracle election win after just one term. Now, of course, a long way to go. No swing is uniform, and this by-election is not a perfect test at all because, I mean, lots of people didn't even bother voting this time, and there were no One Nation candidates, for instance, and so on. So my best guess so far, unless Albanese keeps making mistakes, is that Labor still wins the next election, but only just. And that's the other interesting thing and the bad thing about this result, and this time bad for Australia. Labor looks set to lose so many seats that they will need the Greens, plus other leftists, just to get anything through Parliament. And that would be a disaster because you've got Labor then being pulled more to the left, even more to the left, more extreme on global warming policies and more unstable. Joining me is the panel, Michael Kroger, former Victorian Liberal President, and Steve Conroy, former Labor Senator and Cabinet Minister. How did you see this election result?
Well, I thought it'd be between 3 and 4%, so a slight win to Peter Dutton in that regard. No one ever thought we'd win the seat, let's be frank about that, so it's a pretty good result. As you say, bad for the Greens. They didn't turn up in a lot of polling booths, probably because they would have been abused by people. Elements of the Greens, Andrew, have become the ugly face of racism and anti-Jewish hatred in this country, and their despicable performance in recent weeks against Jews in this country, I've never seen anything like it. And respectable, ordinary middle-class voters, the working middle class, look at this Jewish hatred by the Greens and are just disgusted and appalled, which is why I think, by the way, Brisbane and Ryan, 2 seats which the Greens won at the election in 2022 in Queensland, will probably come back to the coalition. Working class people are disgusted by this type of behaviour. So,
well, I'm going to take that as one very good thing for Australia.
Absolutely,
right?
Absolutely.
But yes, Steve, how did you see this result? Michael sounds like it was just, well, disappointingly about what it expected, but not a real win. Where did you see it?
Yeah. Look, can I firstly just absolutely endorse what, Michael, you've been saying about the Greens and their position? I mean, if the Greens political party want to align themselves with the murderers, rapists, thugs at Hamas, then they get what they deserve, and they got some of it. Let's hope that becomes an absolute across-the-country reaction to their disgusting positioning on these issues. Secondly, I think, look, Michael's got the lipstick out tonight. He's got it on the peg. He's trying to pretend Peter Dutton had a good result. I mean, if Peter Dutton, who's identified that the path to victory for them is through these outer suburban seats, 12, 13 interest rate increases, refugees turn up on our coastline, law and order issues in Frankston, Advance putting $300,000 into a campaign, highlighting and claiming that there could be a rapist or a pedophile or a murderer released by Labor into the Dunkley and Frankston community. If you can't get better than a 3.5% swing, and let's stop pretending it's 4, it's just on 3.5, that is a very poor performance and shows there is no pathway in the way that Peter Dutton has claimed. So I'd be. You could see Susan Ley before the results were known. She was pretty happy. You could see in her eyes on Saturday night after the re-election, she knew what had happened.
Steve, 11 months ago, you won the Aston by-election. There was a 6.5% swing to you in a not dissimilar seat, Melbourne outer suburbs. 11 months later, you've lost 10%. So you've got to look at it in that context. This electorate in Victoria is moving away from the Labor Party, and that is a massive number, 10% in 11 months. So you've got problems. Accurate. You've got problems.
A primary vote.
What's not factually accurate about that?
Actually improved. Our primary vote actually improved.
Yeah, no, I wasn't talking about the primary vote. I was talking about the 2PP.
So
your vote went up because the Greens vote collapsed. Our vote went up because the One Nation and Palmer didn't run. Okay, we all know that.
And you didn't even capture the whole 8%. On primary.
You didn't capture all the Green votes, Stephen, either.
You didn't get all of the. Well, we weren't expecting to.
Yeah, but you got a lot of the. You were. I mean, your candidate did better than the late member. So it's not because this candidate was considered better than the late member. It was because the Greens vote collapsed because people in that electorate were rightly revolted by Bant and co. And those votes went to you in the main.
Can I ask about the Greens? Because I share your absolute disgust for the Greens, for their trawling for the anti-Semitic vote, for the dissension they've introduced into the community. They're a danger. They're frankly a menace. And that's leaving aside all their kooky promises, economics, global warming. Leaving all this is really poisonous. How can you or Labor be exchanging preferences with the Greens after this?
Well, look, we've got an equally abhorrent Pauline Hampson's views on racism and Indigenous issues, well known. And the Liberal Party
leave her aside. Let's stick with the Greens.
No, you can't leave her aside.
Let's leave her aside.
Okay.
Stick with the Greens. Yes, I can. Why would you exchange preferences with the Greens when you agree with me they are toxic to our community?
Well, I think that's something that Labor's got to have a look at. I think it should consider whether or not it's going to actually preference to the Greens. I think when they're running on such a racist platform that they are, the anti-Semitic platform that they are, it becomes much harder for Labor to preference the Greens in that circumstance. As you say, they are trawling. Yeah, they are trying to compete with Donald Trump for, the KKK anti-Semitic vote in Australia. So they have a lot to answer for. And I think that Labor should have a good hard look at that issue.
Big concession from. I don't think it should be. Well, I don't think it should be difficult for Labor.
Shouldn't be
to preference. It should be impossible for Labor to preference such a toxic party.
Yeah, but Steve, and the people in the Labor Party associated with you, the sensible people on the centre right of the Labor Party. I know you'd want to put the Greens last or down there with One Nation. I'll tell you what, the Liberal Party, I can tell you this for a fact, the Liberal Party will preference you, Stephen, in every one of the 151 seats in the next election ahead of the Greens. They will become behind you, even though you're our main enemy. We'll put them behind you in every single seat. These people are disgusting, right? They are racists. Their anti-Jewish hatred is, when you talk about scraping the bottom of the barrel in terms of what some of these Greens have said, these people are. They're through the bottom of the barrel and into the sewer. They're in the sewer.
But one sour note from the election for the Liberals, I have to say. I found this hard to believe. You had a federal Liberal MP, Zoe McKenzie. She's from the seat next door. She's my local member. I thought she was all right. She actually posed with the Labor winner at the by-election posted, "Congratulations, Jodie Billier. You've been a good friend to women across the Mornington Peninsula," where they both are. "I look forward to working with you and looking after Paradise." Listen, in 1 year's time, there will be a general election and a Liberal candidate will be standing against this woman that's just got a Liberal Party endorsement.
So, Andrew, that photograph was taken in September 2022.
I posted again.
Right? Sorry, it was taken more than a year ago. And Zoe McKenzie and the late Labor member, down the peninsula, the Liberal and Labor in Dunkley and Flinders have to work together, right? They work together on mental health issues. The former Labor member and McKenzie, they worked on rail upgrade. Et cetera. The Liberal and Labor members in those two electorates always work together. And so McKenzie was on a number of committees.
Why doesn't McKenzie just write her pre-election bump for her?
Well, she was just being...
Your poor local Liberal
She'd worked with the new Labor member locally on issues, and too much is being read into this. Too much is being read into it.
And Michael, the immediate reaction...
Andrew, I think you...
Yeah?
I think you're being too harsh. I think Michael's taking a very fair-minded view about this situation. They've worked together.
Really, please.
They know each other.
Serious.
And
I don't think the local.
You're allowed. Like Michael and I are allowed to be friends.
Got to go.
Michael and I are allowed to be friends and play golf together.
You weren't friends when you were in politics. You weren't friends when you were in Parliament, mate. Different game.
Actually, we were. I played golf with Michael for over 30 years. And beaten him most times.
You weren't friends.
Importantly.
Guys, thank you very much.
Andrew.
Coming up, who is the traitor MP that our top spies say sold us out? And why is this such a secret? And meanwhile, our Defence Minister says he would bother our national security officials at home on a weekend or something. I mean, seriously. I have to show you something I heard. Knocked me over. Heard on the ABC this morning before I talked to Greg Sheridan. To me, it symbolises so much that is wrong with this country, particularly our defence. I mean, politics and ideology put above hard-headed, practical reality. Now, Defence Minister Richard Marles was on the ABC this morning when he was asked about, of all things, the government's crazy new law banning bosses from pestering workers at home with emails and calls about work. It's the so-called right to disconnect. Listen to his response when he's asked if this new right also applies to people that we pay to keep this country safe day and night from threats like war and terrorism.
When we look at the public service, the civilians in the Department of Defence, do they have a right to disconnect?
People in defence do have a right to have periods where they are not on call, and it is obviously national security is something which happens around the clock. But if you want to get the best out of people, you need to give people an opportunity to have time where it is their time and they're not on call. And so the answer to that question is yes.
Joining me is the country's top foreign affairs writer, Greg Sheridan, in the Australian newspaper. Greg, the good news about that is that China now knows it must attack us between 9 a.m. and 5 p.m. Otherwise, people have knocked off and they can't be called.
Well, Andrew, these comments are so barking mad as they're almost indecipherable. I mean, God alone knows what he's talking about. 2 points. One, the government's industrial relations changes are buggering up the whole economy everywhere. You know, there's going to be no productivity revolution from people working at home. And secondly, already federal public servants, especially those who live in Canberra with no traffic jams and all the rest, have amongst the most cosseted, lovely conditions you could possibly imagine: above average pay, a squillion types of leave, carers leave and sick leave and mental health leave and gender dysphoria leave and anything else you like. The idea that they need a new right to disconnect from the government, which they, connect with 37 hours a week, unless, of course, they've got real responsibilities, in which case they're always connected. God, sometimes I just can't follow what the Albanese government is on about.
It's just, he knew that he had to defend the policy, but did national security. I mean, it's just our commandos now too. You can't pass. I mean, really. You mentioned the leave. There's now the unions are pushing for 10 days of reproductive leave, like for a vasectomy or something like that. You wonder who's going to be ending up doing the work, you and me and maybe a few of our friends. Greg, I was worried about this unreality. Normally, ASEAN, right, these meetings of the Asian leaders, we're holding them here. The Prime Minister's hosting them over 2 days in Melbourne. And I thought we were all on the same page with China. But then along comes the Malaysian Prime Minister, who I used to, years and years ago, rate relatively highly. He said China was not his problems, it was just ours, and we shouldn't push it onto him. Here he is.
And if they have problems with China, they should not impose it upon us. We do not have a problem with China.
Hey?
Well, look, I must say I've known Anwar for many, many decades, and he is a very estimable guy. But Malaysia blows hot and cold on China. They're exactly the way Tony Abbott described Australia. They have a mixture of fear and greed in relation to China. Plus, their Islamic politics means they want to distance themselves a bit from the US. But ASEAN itself is fabulously divided internally. Three of its states, Cambodia, Laos and Myanmar, are basically Chinese strategic clients. Two of its nations, Philippines and Thailand, are military allies of the US. Singapore is super hard-headed and doing everything it can to keep the US there. Indonesia is dedicatedly non-aligned, but every now and again persecutes its ethnic Chinese minority, but tries to make a lot of money out of China. Malaysia itself has today laws which discriminate against ethnic Chinese and ethnic Indonesians and in favour of ethnic Malays. What none of them wants is for Australia to go soft or become neutral. And of course, Anwar's comments are in great contrast, great contradiction to the Philippines' comments. And at least...
Let's have a listen to the President of the Philippines. He had a very different take about a week ago.
I will not allow any attempt by any foreign power to take even 1 square inch of our sovereign territory. The challenges that we face may be formidable, but equally formidable is our resolve. We will not yield.
And let's not forget, Greg, in your rundown, Vietnam was one of the latest countries to have gone to war with China after China invaded it. So ASEAN, are they our friends in this confrontation with China or not?
Overall, they're our friends, but in their own special way. And the great thing about both Marcos and Anwar there is they said coherent things which were intelligible, unlike our government. In response to both of them, Albanese kind of cleared his throat and said nothing. And they don't want us to clear our throat and said nothing. They don't want us to pretend that we are Southeast Asians. You know, Lee Kuan Yew in his memoirs, he derided Gough Whitlam as a sham white Afro-Asian. That's what you end up looking like if you try that. They want us to be. And here's a tip, Andrew. They already know. Yeah, they already know that we are strategic allies of the United States. Guess what? Somebody told them the secret's out. And they also know we have a lot of problems with China's strategic behaviour. Mike Burgess gave that fine speech pointing that out.
You mentioned Mike Burgess, right, the head of ASIO. I'm surprised. There is an air of naivety in Australia about how serious and dangerous the world really is, you know. So in a way, I wasn't surprised to hear the boss of ASIO, Mike Burgess, actually warn last week that one country had a team of spies working in Australia and had got a politician here to be a traitor to this country. Here he is.
In terms of this former politician, were they recruited or did some of this concerning activity happen while they were in Parliament?
The activity, so former politician now, the matter is resolved, but this happened when they were a politician.
It happened when they were in a Parliament in Australia?
Correct.
And was it the federal Parliament?
I won't comment on which Parliament it was. What I will say is foreign interference against the political system happens at all levels of government, local, state and federal, and applies itself equally across all political parties.
Now, it's just been reported that the country involved is China, big surprise, but the name of the MP is still not revealed, should it be?
No, Andrew, I disagree with all my colleagues whom I love and admire in the press. Of course, we all want disclosure in the press, and if I find out the name, I'll put it on the front page. But I think what Mike Burgess has done here is very sophisticated. ASIO collects intelligence, not legal evidence. Actionable intelligence may still not be fit for a court. If you reveal the guy's name, he'll say, I'm innocent. If I'm guilty, try me in a court. And they probably don't have evidence. They don't want to compromise their sources, all the rest of it. But look what Burgess has achieved here. We are having a national discussion about Chinese political interference in Australia. The Chinese have been put on a notice, the community has been put on notice, and politicians have been put on notice that ASIO is alive to this and aware of it. Now, you know, I think in the messy compromises of reality, I think that's a big net positive that Mike Burgess has given us.
I think you make an excellent point, Greg. It just sticks in the craw to think that some traitor is getting away with it. That's the only thing. But Gazio's on his tail, and hope he'll, or she, hope he'll sleep uneasy. Greg Sheridan, thank you so much for your time. Well, coming up, the farmer who says he's being blackmailed over the string of transmission wires that have been put over his farm. Plus, the Brittany Higgins curse strikes again. An inquiry chief attacked for bias and another payout to someone that Higgins accused. It just gets messier and messier. Oh, and why does SBS have a deal with a television station owned by a government that funds the Hamas terrorists? All that after this. In a second, I'll be speaking to farmer Stuart Hackney, who says he's being blackmailed to accept transmission lines on his property. But first, here's a quick look at what's coming up on Sharry after this.
Thanks, Andrew. Well, tonight we've uncovered footage of activists claiming to be terrorists. This chilling video coming up. Also, our exclusive interview with ASEAN Secretary General and his concerns about China. I'll see you at 8.
You got to watch that. I mean, I just think we've let our immigration system run riot and import a lot of trouble we didn't need. Now, I've talked before about the Albanese government's ridiculous plans to build 10,000 kilometres of transmission lines across the country, crisscross, crisscross, to link up all these solar and wind farms it claims we must have to replace coal power. Well, 10,000 kilometres across so many farms, and that's now taken a nasty turn, with farmers in New South Wales claiming they're being held to ransom, and they mean that almost literally. There are laws forcing these farmers to allow these lines across their property, and if they dare complain about where exactly those lines go, well, let's hear from one of the farmers. Stuart Hackney from Dunedoo. Stuart Hackney, thank you so much indeed for your time. You live in a beautiful part of the country. Thank you for the video you've sent us. Lovely place. But your land has been forcibly acquired for some of these transmission lines. What was the problem with that for you?
Well, Andrew, the problem's been the whole way through. It started off with lack of consultation, lack of ability to even talk to anyone where these lines wanted to go. Where we're sitting here at the moment, this is where they wanted to put the power lines all over our infrastructure, but yeah, they just wouldn't accept any local knowledge on the problems.
Now, you did ask for a change though, didn't you?
We've been arguing for 15 months trying to get changes when we've just succeeded in getting a minor change in the alignment, but it's still not up to our expectations. They still won't accept the fact that the shade trees behind me are all going to be removed. There's 40 plus shade trees they're going to take down, leaving our stock without much shade in some paddocks on the property.
Well, that's no good. Now, I've heard some farmers complain, and is this your case as well? I don't know. Some farmers complain that if they got a change like that and they're still not happy, that there'd be a, well, if you don't accept this, you are going to cop something. Is that you will get maybe less compensation than you wanted? What happened with you when you complained about the changes?
Well, Andrew, we're still complaining. Yeah, like I said, we've got the little change in our alignment, but there is some families on the farm that are still going to face the problem if they go to the Valuer General that they will lose any benefits or grants that they've been given in change of alignment. We've actually secured our change in the alignment today after a little bit of talk with a solicitor, so yeah, we're off the hook with that, but yeah, we're still battling to try and get our infrastructure bypassed fully, but they don't seem to want to come to it at any agreement yet.
So that seems really some blackmail tactics. There a thing held over your head.
Well, basically, it is a bit of a blackmail, but it's the compulsory acquisition card that they keep waving around at you. If you don't agree and you don't want to sign up, they just go down the lines of the compulsory acquisition. So once that happens, you're off to the Valuer General and you've got no say in the matter.
don't know. That's coming the real heavy. I mean, Stuart, I don't get it. I mean, where are the politicians on this?
Well, we've had some good support with some of the politicians. Ross Goodell's been trying his hardest to get a bill or something into Parliament to have an inquiry, but unfortunately he just can't get enough people to back him on that. We've met with the Minister and the Treasurer a couple of weeks ago. They're starting to show a little bit of interest now that this whole process has been very, poorly handled. So we're hoping that it continues on, that they come to the party and start to do things a hell of a lot better for us, so that we're not got our back up like we have.
And let's not forget, the end result is that across your beautiful property you're going to have monstrous transmission wires just spoiling your view. You thought you're in rural paradise, you look like a backlot of some industry zone. Stuart Hackney, thank you so much indeed for your time, and good luck with your struggle there. Honestly, there's so many stories already, right, that are brought to you, and you think, the government's way behind in this 10,000 kilometres of transmission lines. You're going to hear a lot more. Thousands of kilometres of these lines still to come. A lot of people are going to be very upset with what's being done to our beautiful countryside. The Brittany Higgins rape allegation today claimed yet another scalp. It's like a curse, you know. It's like everyone that the Brittany Higgins case has touched is destroyed. Higgins is the former Liberal staffer who claims she was raped in the Defence Minister's office in Parliament House by a colleague, Bruce Lehrman, who denies it strongly. Her claim has never been upheld by a court. But Higgins has now fled overseas to get away from the controversy. Lehrman's career has been ruined. He's suing Channel 10 for defamation. At Channel 10, presenter Lisa Wilkinson's career has also crashed after she took Higgins' side and forced the trial to be delayed. Former Defence Minister Linda Reynolds, she's meanwhile suing Higgins and her boyfriend David Shiraz for allegedly defaming her because she thinks she's been punished too. And Shane Drumgold, the ACT Director of Public Prosecutions, he was forced to quit after also taking Higgins' side in a way that was unprofessional, very unprofessional. And today, former Judge Walter Sofronow was found by a Supreme Court acting judge to have communicated with journalist Janet Albrighton of The Australian during his inquiry into this to Drumgold and the way he handled things. And the judge in this case said, well, look, a fair-minded observer could conclude that Sofronow might have been influenced by the views held and publicly expressed by Miss Albrighton. So he's also copped a hiding there. But the judge did not set aside most of Sofronow's findings. So really the trail of destruction over a rape claim that still has not been proved keeps going on. Joining me is the panel, Federal Liberal MP Garth Hamilton, Steve Chavura, Senior Lecturer in History at Campion College and author of some good books as well, one of which is sent me and it still hasn't arrived in the mail. I must go and check. The curious thing about this, Steve, in this judgment is why one judge would assume another judge might be influenced by a journalist simply by speaking to her or would be seen to be biased by fair-minded observers. I thought judges maintain this idea that judges could not be influenced.
Well, you would have hoped so. And of course, as you say, it makes it even stranger when most of those findings were basically still upheld. The language of the accusation is also very tentative. You might conclude, may have been influenced. And my worry about that is that it sets a pretty bad precedent for the media to be able to access judges, to be able to access lawyers, because that will create a real dissuasion for people to be able to speak to the media. And so it's not necessarily a great thing for freedom of speech and media access to these really important cases that are just manifestly in the public interest. But this whole case has just been a perfect storm of political vindictiveness, ideological Me Too witch hunting, media sensationalism, and I think everyone just wants to see it finished, especially Brittany Higgins.
I'll see it finished. Well, in fact, it's rolling on. I mean, we've got former Defence Minister Linda Reynolds. She's going into mediation this week with Higgins and Shiraz over her case, suing them for defamation. And she's also been paid $90,000 by the ACT government because the prosecutor in Higgins' case, Shane Drumgold, we've discussed already, falsely accused her of acting improperly. But I have to say, Garth Hamilton, the payout I still do want an inquiry into is the $2.44 million the Albanese government paid Higgins after just one day of negotiation after she claimed the Liberals had treated her badly once she claimed she was raped. Where's the investigation into that use of our taxpayer money?
I think, Andrew, that's exactly not just what you and I would like to see, but most Australian people. This has been a very sorry case. As you point out, there's absolutely no winners out of this. It's dragged a lot of people down through some very bad commentary. But goodness me, the role that the Attorney General has played in politicising that payout and ignoring completely evidence from anyone else except Ms Higgins, it's an extraordinary process that he's undertaken. It clearly has hairs on it. There's clearly questions to be asked there. And look, I do just want to go back to one point on that earlier question. The only reason that there's any question whatsoever of Sofronov's behaviour is because Janet Albrechtsen asked so many good questions. That's the reason that there's the apprehension of bias. That's what they're saying there. Because she was so good and did not give up and kept asking and asking, that's why people might have some perception of a perceived bias there. That's a terrible indictment, I think, on the process when Mr Sofronoff was clearly open to every journalist who wanted to speak to him. It's just that one of them wanted to push and keep asking questions just like the ones you asked, Andrew.
Well, it's so strange because it was General Albrechtsen asking these questions that in fact has exposed so much that is a little strange about this case. And if asking questions is now a crime, goodness heavens for me. But anyway, back to this point about that payout. $2.44 million of our money, Stephen, handed over one day of negotiation with Brittany Higgins' lawyers. It was for, the Liberals treated me badly. I can never work again. I'll need some money also for help for my daily tasks and all that. The Liberal ministers that she was accusing of bad behaviour, Linda Reynolds and Michaelia Cash, deny it. They were refused permission by the Albanese government to go in and deny it in those mediation talks. Listen, the whole thing stinks to high heaven, doesn't it?
You know something? It's almost as though the Labor Party was falling over itself to give Brittany Higgins money. And can you blame people in the Australian public who might wonder if there's a connection between this payout and the fact that for months and months the Labor Party was using this case and speaking about it as though it had been proven that Brittany Higgins had been raped by Mr Lehrman, using this case to bash the Liberal Party and ScoMo over the head for months and months and months and create immeasurable political damage. It wouldn't. I'm sure many people in Australia are wondering whether there's a connection between the two.
Yeah, I suspect that the Labor Party, and this is just pure supposition, an inquiry would get to the bottom of this, I'm just putting it out there, that the Labor Party needed the Brittany Higgins case against the Liberals to be true because Labor had exploited it so much and therefore did not want to question her and just handed over the money. I think that stinks. I don't think it was impartial and I would like an inquiry into it. That's a lot of money. By the way, Garth, I don't know how much you watch SBS. Taxpayers fund it. What was it called? Station for Sex and Football. Soccer. SBS, funded by taxpayers, ethnic broadcaster, is reviewing now complaints by Jewish bodies that it has a deal with Al Jazeera. That's a broadcaster based in Qatar, funded by Qatar, and Qatar, of course, in turn funds the Hamas terrorist group, the Hamas terrorist group that attacked Israel. It is so biased, Al Jazeera, that its reporters cut off any Palestinians, I've seen this happen about 2 or 3 times, who blame Hamas for their suffering. Like this man in Gaza saying, why is Hamas hiding among us civilians? You know, this is human shield strategy. Why is Hamas hiding among us civilians? Why don't they go to hell and hide there instead? Watch the nervous Al Jazeera reporter cut him off.
وبعدين بالنسبه للمقاومه اللي بتيجي بتخبى بين الناس، ليش تخبى بين الناس؟ يروح في جهنم يتخبى. يعني هذه شهادات من المواطنين بسبب يعني هذا
Gareth Hamilton, should our taxpayer-funded broadcaster SBS be screening Al Jazeera's reports?
Simple answer, no. I think there's an expectation on a public funded media organisation to be able to provide, unbiased reporting and coverage that the Australian people want. I think we're all happy that that fills a certain role, and SBS has, over time, beyond just sex before soccer. I think it was when I was growing up. I'm sure it fills that role. Continued.
Thank you.
But Andrew, there's a question here, really. Why do we need to be taking the views of what is clearly a very constrained view of the media market from Al Jazeera? But they're clearly not wanting to show both sides of that argument. The case you put there is very, very clear. You would think, as a minimum, the Minister of Communications would be bringing SBS in and asking that very question. I think that would be a very simple expectation on the Minister, to show that she's not biased, to show that she does want SBS to do what's right by the Australian people.
Yeah, I noticed that it's already, this is the wicked Jewish lobby again, it's flexing its muscles. I'm not Jewish. I think it's a disgrace. Have done for many years. What do you make of it, Steve?
Look, I mean, Al Jazeera has a history of outright anti-Semitism. In 9/11, it perpetuated the rumour going around at the time that Jews had been informed beforehand that the planes were going to leave, so they could not be in the Twin Towers that day, an anti-Semitic conspiracy. In 2008, Al Jazeera celebrated on air the birthday of a Lebanese terrorist who killed 4 Jews. In 2017, it tweeted an anti-Semitic caricature of a Jew. 2019, it produced a video minimising and denying the Holocaust, and of course, in 2023, it claimed falsely that a missile from Israel destroyed a hospital in Gaza. Qatar, that funds Al Jazeera, doesn't even recognise Israel as a state. So SBS, as long as it has any relationship with Al Jazeera, is actually having a relationship with a terrorist facilitating Israel denying entity. We're quite right to question the propriety of all of this.
I agree. I also think we should question whether Qatar Air has a right to have landing spots in Australian airports, because Qatar actually funds Hamas. It actually funds one of the world's worst terror groups. Why we allow its TV stations onto our publicly funded broadcasters is a disgrace. And Garth, I'm so glad you're on board, and I hope that we can get something going here politically. Garth Hamilton, Stephen Trevura, thank you both so much for your time. After the break, King Charles is to visit us, or is he really up to it? We'll check that out. Plus, Britain's Prime Minister warns pro-Palestinian activists are a threat now to British democracy. I think he's got a big point. We'll have a listen to some of what he has to say after this and talk to Esther Kraku. Britain is such a warning to us in so many ways. It's had mass immigration from Muslim countries and now huge pro-Palestinian protests. Some very threatening, even violent, with politicians also threatened with death. I mean, last week, former MP George Galloway, he won a by-election in a heavily Muslim area by campaigning against Israel very vehemently as a Hamas supporter too. And all this has been leading the Prime Minister to make this dramatic speech.
In recent weeks and months, we have seen a shocking increase in extremist disruption and criminality. What started as protests on our street has descended into intimidation, threats, and planned acts of violence. Jewish children fearful to wear their school uniform lest it reveal their identity. Muslim women abused in the street for the actions of a terrorist group they have no connection with. Now our democracy itself is a target. Council meetings and local events have been stormed. MPs do not feel safe in their homes.
And ironically, while he was doing that, you could hear protesters in the background trying to drown him out. Joining me from London is Esther Kraku, writer, broadcaster, commentator extraordinaire. Esther, thanks for your time. Why did your Prime Minister give that speech? It seemed really quite impromptu, just dragged it out on a Friday evening and bang, there it was. What was that about?
Yeah, so the timing of that speech was quite suspicious. It was right after George Galloway stormed through the Rochdale elections. I mean, George Galloway won more votes than the Conservatives, the Lib Democrats, and the Labour Party combined. So clearly, he's shaken up the establishment in a significant way. And obviously, the main driver behind that vote and that victory was Gaza. He said, literally in his victory speech, this is for Gaza. So it kind of woke up Rishi Sunak. He didn't decide to give a speech when he was, giving the Metropolitan Police an extra £30 million to protect MPs who are being intimidated in their own homes, who are being harassed outside of Parliament. He chose to do it when he realised that actually there was a significant threat to the Conservative vote. And that's raised many eyebrows. Obviously, the speech was well received. He did say that the police need to actually start policing these protests instead of just managing them, putting up anti-Semitic hate chants and slogans, reflecting them off Big Ben. They're completely unacceptable. And he should have said this a lot earlier, but, the timing is very suspicious. But one of the things I have recognised with this George Galloway victory is the fact that the Labour, Lib Dem and Conservative establishment, I'm not talking about the things that he spoke about outside of Gaza. He talked about, reopening the maternity and A&E care unit in the Rochdale Infirmary. They didn't mention anything of that. He talked about supporting small businesses. The main party didn't talk about that at all. He talked about, community football and things that actually promote community feeling in Rochdale, and none of the major parties have talked about any of that. So yes, George Galloway is a crank, and unfortunately he did use the whole Gaza conflict to storm to victory. But actually there are real issues that George Galloway touched upon that none of the major parties have spoken about. He's really talking to some working class, white, patriotic, pro-Brexit communities in the country, and no one is talking about that.
A pity that it's just a friend of almost every dictator has met, from Saddam Hussein to whatever, and to Putin. But look, I take your point there. But the thing about Rishi Sunak's, your Prime Minister's speech, I would have thought it would be more appropriate to have given it after you had the Speaker of your Parliament say, hey, listen, I got to break the rules and let Labor MPs go on the record, saying this and that about Gaza because they are getting death threats and they could be killed. And I'm thinking, what has British politics come to, where people are so terrified of the protesters on the street, the death threats, that they break Parliament's rules and they're too scared of saying maybe what they really think? I mean, you have really got a problem if that's what the Speaker himself is saying.
Yes, Rishi Sunak should have given that speech after basically the first protest, the first time we saw people chanting anti-Semitic, rhetoric on the streets of London. That should have been the first time that Rishi Sunak had given this speech. It's long overdue. It took MPs having to be threatened, feeling unsafe in their own homes, being intimidated outside of Parliament. I was in Parliament last week. I kid you not, there was a secret passageway from Parliament outside into the streets of London with a lot of police presence, because apparently there has to be heightened security because of all the intimidation. I had to be patted down. That never really happens anymore. They were like, we're patting down every single person, we're scanning you, all of that. Heightened security in Parliament because of all these protests and these intimidation. He should have spoken about this months ago, but unfortunately he had to take George Galloway winning the election, the by-election in Rochdale, for it to happen. And you're right, it's very scary.
No, I'm hearing you. So true, yep. And I noticed he was a bit short on solutions as well. The King looks like coming to Australia around October. His cancer diagnosis delayed his initial plans. Is he really in shape to come here then? I mean, it's not confirmed, but we've got all these Republican politicians now climbing over themselves to say, come to my state or whatever.
Well, it's a bit touch and go at the moment because of the King's diagnosis. Obviously, he wanted to come in October to coincide with the Commonwealth Heads of Government Summit, which will be a week-long summit in Samoa. And he was planning his first state visit as the King to Australia then. It's really interesting. Republicans here as well are actually pushing for the King to make that trip because they realise how important and how significant it is. Trade deals with countries like Australia was one of the big Brexit promises, and we're really hoping for the King to lay some good groundwork there.
Well, we have an Assistant Minister for the Republic, but he's gone very, very quiet because it seems the royal brand still works under King Charles, Esther.
Absolutely. And, this is one of the things that people don't want to admit. The royal family are the ultimate ambassadors, and they do have a lot of value. But unfortunately, Republicans are just trying to use anti-Republican, anti-monarchy sentiments to try and toot their own horn.
They cry, I laugh. I laugh at their tears. That's very ungracious of me. Esther Kreku, thank you so much indeed for your time. Really appreciate it. That's it from me. Coming up now is Sharri Markson.